After 7 years, the millionaire visits his ex on the farm. What she was hiding left him shocked. Some mistakes take 7 years to fix. Some take a lifetime. Adrian Smith was about to find out which kind he'd made. His black Tesla kicked up clouds of dust on the dirt road, the only sound besides his own ragged breathing. Meadowbrook Farm appeared through the trees exactly as he remembered it. Weathered red barn, wraparound porch, hills rolling behind it like a painting he'd walked out of and couldn't forget. 7 years. 7 years since he'd chosen Silicon Valley over this soil. 7 years since he'd become a millionaire while convincing himself he'd made the right choice. The lies we tell ourselves are always the most expensive ones. Adrian switched off the engine. Through the windshield, he saw her. Claire Bennett, standing on that porch like she'd been expecting him, like maybe she'd been waiting for 7 years. She was thinner now, dark hair in a practical braid, wearing dirt-stained jeans that had seen better seasons. But those brown eyes, God, those eyes still held fire. He stepped out. The afternoon sun felt different here. Warmer somehow, more honest than California light. The space between the car and the porch might as well have been an ocean. Adrian. Her voice carried across the distance, steady but guarded. You came. I said I would. The words tasted like ash. They both knew 7 years had passed since that promise. We should talk, he managed. About everything. Claire's jaw tightened, her hand gripping the porch railing like it was the only thing keeping her standing. Yes. I suppose we should. But as Adrian walked toward her, every step feeling like a confession, he couldn't shake the certainty that Claire was hiding something. Something that went deeper than awkwardness, deeper than hurt. Something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about the day he drove away. Welcome back, my lovely family, to another incredibly heartwarming story. I trust everyone is doing great. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button now so you don't get to miss the next story. Also remember to hit the notification icon bell so you don't miss the remaining part of this highly emotional and intriguing story. As always, I pray this heartwarming story brings you good fortune. The porch steps creaked under Adrian's weight, a sound that transported him instantly back to lazy summer evenings when those creaks had been accompanied by laughter and the clink of beer bottles. Back when the world had felt infinite and this farm had been the center of their universe. Claire didn't move from her spot by the railing. She watched him approach with the wariness of someone who'd learned that good things don't last, that people leave, that 7 years can turn lovers into strangers. The place looks good, Adrian said, and immediately hated himself for such a weak opening. 7 years of silence, and that's what he leads with. But what else could he say? I'm sorry. I was wrong. I never stopped thinking about you. All of it was true, and none of it felt adequate. It's surviving, Claire replied, and Adrian heard layers in those 2 words. The farm was surviving. She was surviving. They were both still here, still standing, but surviving was a far cry from thriving. Up close, he could see the fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, the calluses on her hands that told stories of hard labor and harder choices. She was 32 now, same as him, but she'd aged differently. Not worse, just differently. Where his stress came from board meetings and investor calls, hers came from dawn milkings and storm damage and the relentless truth that farms don't care about your feelings. Can I? Adrian gestured toward the farmhouse. Can we go inside? Claire hesitated, just for a moment, but Adrian caught it. There it was again, that flicker of something in her expression. Protection. Guardedness. Like she was standing in front of a door she didn't want him to open. Of course, she said finally, pushing off from the railing. I'll make coffee. The interior of the farmhouse hit Adrian like a physical blow. Not because it had changed, that would have been easier. No, what shattered him was how much had stayed exactly the same. like a museum dedicated to the life they'd planned to build together. The same worn couch they'd found at a yard sale, reupholstered now but unmistakably theirs. The same oak dining table where they'd spread out blueprints and dreamed in the language of square footage and sustainable farming practices. But there were new things too, unexpected things. Photographs lined the walls, not just of Claire, but of people Adrian didn't recognize. Young faces, old faces, families, individuals. All of them smiling, all of them standing somewhere on this property. And in the corner on a small shelf, a collection of hand-carved wooden figures, animals and people, each one unique. "You've had visitors," Adrian observed, studying the photographs while Claire moved into the kitchen. "Guests," she corrected from the other room. The sound of the coffee maker gurgling to life filled the silence. The farm, it's become something of a retreat center. A retreat center. That hadn't been part of their original plan. Their plan had been simpler, smaller. An organic farm, maybe a small CSA program, a quiet life away from the chaos of the world. But looking at these photographs, at the evidence of dozens, maybe hundreds of people who'd passed through this place, Adrian realized their dream had evolved in his absence. Or maybe Claire had evolved it, taking the seed of their shared vision and growing it into something he couldn't have imagined. He moved deeper into the living room, and that's when he saw it. Above the fireplace, where in his memory there'd been nothing but bare wall, now hung a piece of wood, beautifully sanded and stained. Carved into it in elegant script were the initials A+C inside a heart, and below it, a date. May 17th. The day they'd bought this farm together, 9 years ago. The day they'd stood in this very room, empty and dusty and full of potential, and promised each other forever. His throat tightened. Why would she keep this? Why would she memorialize the beginning when he'd given her such a painful ending? Sugar. Claire's voice pulled him back. "Black is fine," he managed, turning away from the carved memorial to their past. She handed him a mug, their fingers not quite touching, both of them careful to maintain the distance. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the same couch where they'd once fit together like puzzle pieces, where distance between them had been impossible because they'd always been drawn to each other like magnets. Now, the space between them felt like a chasm. Adrian sipped his coffee, buying time, trying to find the right words. But Claire spoke first. "Why are you here, Adrian?" Direct. That was new. The Claire he remembered had always been gentle in her approach, softening hard questions with easy smiles. But 7 years had apparently taught her that dancing around the truth just wastes time. "I don't know," he admitted, because despite the 3-hour drive from Boston, despite the sleepless nights leading up to this moment, he still wasn't sure how to articulate the hollowness that had been consuming him. "That's not true. I do know. I just don't know how to say it without sounding like every regretful ex-boyfriend cliché." "Try anyway." He set his mug down on the coffee table, the same table that still bore the ring stain from where they'd left a wine bottle too long one celebratory night. "I built everything I said I would build. The company, the success, the money. I did it all, Claire. And it doesn't mean anything. It's just empty. All of it." Claire's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Not sympathy exactly. More like recognition. Like she'd known this moment was coming long before he did. "And you thought coming back here would fill it?" she asked quietly. "I thought coming back to you might," he said, and there it was. The truth laid bare between them like a wound that had never properly healed. She looked away, toward the window where the afternoon sun painted the Vermont hills in shades of gold and amber. 7 years. Adrian. You didn't call. You didn't write. You disappeared into your new life like I was just a chapter you'd finished reading. "That's not fair," he started, but she cut him off. "Isn't it? You made your choice. The startup over the farm. The city over this life. Me, I made my choice too. I chose to stay. To build this place. To keep the dream alive, even if I had to do it alone. She paused, her hands wrapped around her mug like she was trying to draw warmth from it. You don't get to waltz back in here after all this time and expect things to just pick up where we left off. I'm not expecting that, Adrian said, though part of him had been hoping for exactly that. Had been hoping that love could be paused and restarted like a song on a playlist. I needed to see you. To know that you're okay. To maybe understand why I can't seem to move forward. And Claire turned back to him. Am I what you expected? Is the farm what you imagined it would become? He looked around the room again, really looked this time. At the wear patterns on the floor that spoke of countless footsteps. At the bookshelf crammed with titles about sustainable agriculture, holistic healing, and community building. At a bulletin board near the kitchen entrance covered in thank you cards and photographs and hand-drawn pictures. Clearly from children. It's more, he said honestly. It's so much more than we dreamed. You did this, Claire. You took our half-formed ideas and you made them real. Something in her expression cracked. Just slightly. We did this, she corrected softly. Every nail I hammered, every seed I planted, every decision I made, you were part of it. This was our dream, Adrian. It didn't stop being ours just because you weren't physically here. The weight of that statement settled over him like snow, beautiful and suffocating. She'd been carrying their shared dream alone, keeping it alive, nurturing it through seasons and storms and surely countless moments when giving up would have been easier. Show me, Adrian said suddenly. Show me what you've built. Please. Claire studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was worthy of the tour, whether his presence here was genuine or just another selfish impulse from a man who'd already taken enough from her. Finally, she nodded. All right. But Adrian, you need to understand something. This isn't just a farm anymore. It's a sanctuary. For people who need healing, who need space to breathe, who need to remember what it feels like to be human in a world that keeps demanding we be machines. She stood, setting her mug down with a quiet click. It's sacred ground. So if you're going to walk it with me, you walk it with respect. I will, he promised, standing to follow her. I do. As they stepped back out onto the porch, Adrian noticed details he'd missed in his nervous arrival. Wind chimes hanging from the eaves, their gentle song mixing with the breeze. A herb garden thriving in repurposed wooden crates, rosemary and thyme and lavender spilling over the edges. A hand-painted sign pointing toward various parts of the property. Meditation barn, community garden, goat pasture, reflection pond. This wasn't just a farm. Claire had built something entirely unique, something that honored their original vision while transcending it completely. And as they walked down the porch steps together, maintaining that careful distance, Adrian felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe it's possibility. The sense that some stories don't end where we think they do, that some chapters are merely paused, waiting for the right moment to continue. If you've ever felt like you made the wrong choice in life, like you walked away from something that mattered, you're not alone in this moment. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones about finding our way back. Stay with us, because what Adrian discovers next will change everything he thought he understood about the day he left. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western hills, painting everything in that particular golden light that only exists in rural New England during autumn. Claire led him first toward the barn, that same red structure that had been barely standing when they'd bought the place, that they'd planned to renovate together someday. Someday had come, Adrian realized as they approached. The barn stood proud and solid now, its doors open to reveal a space that had been completely transformed. But as they reached the entrance, Claire paused, her hand on the weathered wood of the doorframe. She looked back at Adrian, and in her eyes, he saw it again. That guardedness. That secret. Whatever she was hiding, whatever truth she'd been protecting, it was in there. In the heart of the dream they'd once shared. And Adrian was about to discover just how deep her sacrifice had truly gone. It is, Adrian agreed. But it would mean leaving. For at least a year, maybe more. The farm, you, everything we've built. Claire was quiet for a long time. Her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, but Adrian heard the crack beneath it. Do you want to go? It was the question he'd been asking himself for 3 sleepless nights. Did he want to go? Yes and no and everything in between. He wanted the challenge, the validation, the chance to build something that could reach beyond these 120 acres. But he also wanted this. Wanted Claire and the farm and the life they'd been building one fence post at a time. I don't want to leave you, he said, which wasn't quite the same as saying no. But you want to go, Claire finished for him. I don't know. Claire, what if this is our chance? What if we could use this money, this success, to make the farm everything we dreamed it could be? I could go, build this thing, and come back with resources to really do this right. Even as he said it, Adrian knew he was bargaining with the universe. Trying to have both. Trying to postpone the choice. Claire set her mug down, turned to face him fully. In the dying light, her eyes were the color of the forest in deep summer. Adrian, I love you. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. So I'm going to tell you the truth, even though it terrifies me. She took a breath, and Adrian felt the world tilt. If you go, you should go completely. No half measures, no looking back over your shoulder, no guilt. You should go and give it everything you have. Build something extraordinary. Because that's who you are. You're someone who builds things, who sees possibilities, who makes them real. And if I ask you to stay, if I make you choose between me and this opportunity, you'll resent me for it. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but someday. And that resentment will poison everything we have. Claire, no, Adrian started, but she pressed on. I'll be here. The farm will be here. And if, after you've done what you need to do, you want to come back, then come back. But don't stay out of obligation. Don't sacrifice your dreams because you're afraid of hurting me. I'm strong enough to handle this. What I'm not strong enough to handle is watching you slowly die inside because you gave up something that mattered to you. She was giving him permission to leave. More than that, she was setting him free. It was the most selfless, heartbreaking thing anyone had ever done for him. He should have said no. Should have recognized the gift for what it was, a sacrifice wrapped in love, and honored it by staying. But he was 25 and ambitious and convinced he could do both, could build his empire and come back to his kingdom. He left 3 weeks later. Claire drove him to the airport. They didn't cry, though later, Adrian would wish they had. Maybe tears would have been honest enough to make him reconsider. Instead, they were brave and optimistic and foolish. I'll call you every day, he promised. Just build something amazing, she said. He kissed her one last time in the departure terminal, tasting salt and coffee and goodbye. Then he walked through security and didn't look back because if he had, he might have seen that Claire stayed there, watching the space where he disappeared, for nearly an hour after his flight took off. The calls came every day for the first month. Then every other day. Then weekly. The startup consumed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. 18-hour days, endless meetings. The pressure to prove himself in a world where he was the youngest person in every room. The farm, Claire, Vermont. It all started to feel like a dream he'd once had, beautiful but distant. Claire never complained. She listened to his stories about funding rounds and user growth and market penetration. She told him about the farm's progress, about the greenhouse she was building, about the CSA program she'd started. Her voice was always warm, always supportive. But the silences between words grew longer. The things they didn't say piled up like snow, quiet and suffocating. The calls became monthly. Then they stopped altogether. No dramatic breakup, no final argument. Just a gradual fading, like a photograph left too long in sunlight. Adrian told himself it was temporary, that he'd go back once the company stabilized, once they'd closed the next funding round, once things settled down. But in the startup world, things never settle down. There's always another milestone, another crisis, another reason to postpone the life you'd promised yourself you'd return to. Years passed in a blur of code and contracts and conquest. The app succeeded beyond anyone's wildest projections. Adrian became wealthy, then very wealthy, then wealthy enough that money stopped meaning anything. He bought a penthouse in San Francisco with views of the bay. He dated women who looked good in photographs but felt like strangers in the dark. He gave interviews about innovation and disruption and the future of agriculture technology. And every single night, before he fell asleep in his king-sized bed in his temperature-controlled apartment, he thought about a farmhouse in Vermont and a woman with green eyes who'd loved him enough to let him go. He wrote letters he never sent, drafted emails that sat in his folder for months before he deleted them, picked up his phone 100 times to call her, but never quite pressed the button. What would he say? That he was sorry. That he'd been wrong. That success tasted like ashes when she wasn't there to share it? 7 years was long enough to build an empire. It was also long enough to realize that everything he'd built was empty without the one person who'd believed in him from the beginning. The truth is, life has a way of showing us what matters, but sometimes it takes longer than we'd like to learn the lesson. Sometimes we have to lose everything to understand what we actually had. If you're still here with us, thank you. Because the best part of the story, the part that will break your heart and heal it at the same time, is still coming. 3 months ago, Adrian had been in a board meeting, discussing quarterly projections and expansion strategies, when his phone buzzed with a notification. A Google alert he'd set up years ago and forgotten about. There was a news article about sustainable farming initiatives in Vermont. And there, in one of the accompanying photographs, was Claire. She was standing in a field, surrounded by people, laughing at something someone had said. She looked older, yes, but radiant. Alive in a way that made Adrian's chest ache with longing and regret. The article mentioned Meadowbrook Farm as a successful model for agricultural therapy and community healing. It mentioned Claire Bennett as the founder and visionary behind the project. She'd done it. Everything they'd dreamed about and more. She'd built paradise, and he'd missed it. Missed watching it grow. Missed being part of it. Missed her. That night, for the first time in 7 years, Adrian cried. Not the quiet tears of melancholy, but deep body-shaking sobs for everything he'd traded away. For the life he'd abandoned. For the woman he'd loved and left and never stopped loving. Not for a single day. The next morning, he'd sent her an email. Just 3 lines. Claire, it's Adrian. I know it's been too long. Can I come see you? She'd taken 2 weeks to respond. 2 weeks during which Adrian checked his email obsessively. Convinced she'd ignore him. Convinced he'd lost his chance forever. But then, finally, her reply. Saturday, October 12th. 2 p.m. You know where to find me. And that was how, on a golden autumn afternoon, Adrian Smith found himself pulling up to Meadowbrook Farm in his black Tesla. 7 years too late and desperately hoping that some things, some loves, could survive even the longest winter. The barn's interior took Adrian's breath away. This wasn't the dilapidated structure they'd once walked through, pointing at rotting beams and dreaming about what could be. This was a cathedral. Someone, Claire, had transformed it into a space that felt both rustic and sacred. The afternoon light streamed through windows that hadn't existed 7 years ago, creating geometric patterns on the smooth wooden floor. The old hayloft had been converted into a meditation space, accessible by a sturdy staircase with a handrail carved with intricate vine patterns. Below, the main floor was divided into sections, a yoga area with mats rolled neatly against the wall, a circle of chairs that suggested group meetings or therapy sessions, and along one wall, a gallery of sorts. But it was the gallery that stopped Adrian in his tracks. Dozens of photographs lined the wall, each one telling a story. He moved closer, studying the faces. A teenage girl standing next to a goat, her smile tentative but real. An older man, maybe in his 60s, kneeling in a garden, dirt on his hands and peace in his expression. A young couple, their arms around each other, standing in front of the farmhouse at sunset. And more, so many more. Different ages, different backgrounds, all of them captured in moments of genuine joy or quiet contemplation. Who are all these people? Adrian asked, though Claire had stayed near the entrance, giving him space to explore. People who needed this place, she said simply. The farm, it's open to anyone who needs healing. Some stay for a weekend, some for months. We have a few permanent residents now, people who help run the programs in exchange for room and board. But most are temporary, visitors passing through on their journey to wherever they need to be. Adrian moved along the wall, and that's when he started noticing the details he'd missed initially. Small plaques beneath each photograph with names and dates, and sometimes brief quotes. Here I learned to breathe again. This farm saved my life. I found myself in the soil. Claire, this is extraordinary, he said, and heard the inadequacy of the words even as he spoke them. Extraordinary didn't capture it. What she'd built was a sanctuary in the truest sense, a place where broken people could come and remember how to be whole. It's what we always talked about, Claire said, and Adrian heard something in her voice, a gentle rebuke maybe, or just a statement of fact. You remember those late nights when we'd dream about what this place could become? You said it could be more than just a farm, that it could be a place where people connected back to the earth, to themselves, to what matters. He did remember. Vaguely. The memories felt like they belonged to someone else, a younger, more idealistic version of himself who hadn't yet learned that dreams were expensive and usually got sacrificed on the altar of practicality. Except Claire hadn't sacrificed the dream. She'd nurtured it, grown it, made it real. I never thought, I didn't imagine you'd actually do it, Adrian admitted. Not on this scale. Claire walked further into the barn, running her hand along one of the support beams. It grew organically. The first person who came was actually someone I met at the farmer's market. She was going through a divorce, needed to get away from the city for a weekend. I offered her the guest room. She stayed for 2 weeks, helped with the harvest, and left looking like a different person. She told her therapist about it, and the therapist called me, asked if she could refer other clients. It just grew from there. There was pride in her voice, but also exhaustion. Adrian looked at her more carefully now, seeing past his own guilt and longing to really observe the woman standing before him. The shadows under her eyes. The way she held her shoulders, strong but tense. The clothes that were clean but worn, mended in places. It must be expensive. Running all this. It is, Claire said, not quite meeting his eyes. But we make it work. Another non-answer. Another deflection. Adrian filed it away with all the other small evasions he'd noticed, the pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite see yet. They left the meditation barn and Claire led him through the rest of the property. The vegetable garden, nearly 3 times the size he remembered, with raised beds arranged in a pattern that seemed random until he realized, with a jolt, that it was exactly the layout he'd sketched one drunk evening years ago. He'd drawn it on a napkin, explained his theory about companion planting and water efficiency, and Claire had laughed and called him a secret farmer trapped in a programmer's body. She'd built it, exactly as he'd designed it. The goat pasture was new, home to 6 Nigerian dwarf goats who trotted over to greet them, their tiny hooves creating a symphony of clicks on the stone path. Claire scratched each one behind the ears, murmuring their names: Daisy, Clover, Moonbeam, Sage, Pepper, and Adrian. "You named a goat after me?" He couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. Claire's cheeks colored slightly. He was stubborn and brilliant and had a habit of escaping his pen to explore places he wasn't supposed to go. The name seemed fitting. It should have been funny. It was funny. But it also wasn't, because it meant that even after he'd left, even after the calls had stopped and the silence had stretched into years, he'd still been present here. Present enough to name a goat after. They walked to what Claire called the reflection pond, a small body of water that sat in a natural depression on the eastern edge of the property. Someone had built a simple dock extending over the water, and a wooden bench sat at the end, positioned to face the sunset. The pond's surface was mirror smooth, reflecting the surrounding trees in perfect detail. "This is where people come when they need to be alone with their thoughts," Claire explained. "We have a rule. No one disturbs anyone at the pond. It's sacred silent space." Adrian looked at the bench, and his heart stuttered. Carved into the backrest, subtle enough that you'd only see it if you were sitting there, were 2 sets of initials: AS plus CB. "When did you build this?" he asked. 3 years ago. We needed a quiet space, somewhere away from the main buildings." She paused. "I built the dock myself. Took me 6 weekends. I'm not as fast as you were with construction." But she'd done it. That was the pattern Adrian was starting to see. Everything he'd left unfinished, every plan they'd sketched but never executed, Claire had completed. Alone. While he'd been in San Francisco building something that made him money but left him empty, she'd been here building something that filled the holes in people's souls. The realization was humbling and devastating in equal measure. As they walked back toward the farmhouse, they encountered a young woman, maybe mid-20s, coming out of one of the smaller outbuildings. She waved at Claire with easy familiarity. "How's the pottery coming, Maya?" Claire called. "Good. I think I finally got the glaze right. Want to see?" "Later, definitely." "Maya, this is Adrian. An old friend." "Adrian, Maya's been with us for 4 months. She's our resident artist and teaches pottery workshops." Maya gave Adrian a curious look, the kind that suggested Claire didn't often introduce old friends, but she was polite enough not to pry. "Nice to meet you. Claire, don't forget we have the group session at 5. "I won't forget," Claire assured her. As Maya walked away, Adrian asked, "She lives here?" "In the cottage we converted from the old equipment shed. We have 5 residents right now, people who are part of the community and help run various programs. Maya does pottery. Sam, you haven't met him yet. He manages the livestock and teaches animal therapy. There's Elijah. He's our gardener and handles all the agricultural education workshops. And Margaret and Tom. They're retired teachers who oversee our youth programs." Youth programs. Livestock. Pottery. Agricultural education. This wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a thriving community, a living organism that breathed and grew and touched lives. "How do you fund all of this?" Adrian asked, because the programmer in him, the businessman, couldn't help but run the numbers. Feed for the animals, maintenance on the buildings, utilities, food for residents and guests, materials for workshops. The operating costs had to be substantial. "Carefully," Claire said with a small smile. "We charge what people can afford for retreats. Some pay full price, some pay nothing. We have a small grant from a local foundation. We sell vegetables and goat products at the farmer's market. We teach workshops. We make it work. There was that phrase again. We make it work. The polite way of saying they were constantly struggling. Constantly one bad season or major repair away from disaster. They'd circled back to the farmhouse now, the sun beginning its serious descent toward evening. The property glowed in the golden hour light, every building, every garden bed, every carefully tended space radiating the kind of beauty that only comes from love and attention and years of careful work. Adrian stood on the porch, looking out at the empire Claire had built from their shared dream, and felt something crack inside him. Not break, exactly, but crack open, like a seed splitting to let something new grow through. You did it, he said quietly. Everything we talked about, everything we dreamed, you actually did it. You took our half-baked ideas from when we were kids and you made them real and meaningful and, God, Claire, this is beautiful. This is everything I didn't know I was missing. Claire stood beside him, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the evening. It was our dream, Adrian. I kept it alive. For both of us. But why? The question burst out of him, raw and desperate. Why would you do that? After I left, after I chose everything else over this, over you, why would you keep building our dream? Claire turned to face him, and in her eyes, Adrian saw something that made his chest tight. Not anger, though she would have been justified in that. Not bitterness, though 7 years of solitude had surely earned her some resentment. What he saw was sadness, deep and old and carried so long it had become part of her. Because love doesn't just stop, Adrian. It doesn't switch off because someone leaves or because time passes or because life gets hard. I loved you. I love you still, probably, though I'm not sure what that means anymore after all this time. And when you love someone, truly love them, you want them to succeed. You want their dreams to come true, even if they're having those dreams somewhere else, with someone else without you. The words landed like punches, each one finding a tender spot Adrian didn't know he still had. There was never anyone else, he said. In 7 years, Claire, there was never anyone who mattered. No one who made me feel anything real. It was all just noise. Distraction. Nothing. Then you're a fool, Claire said, not unkindly. Because the world is full of wonderful people. You just weren't looking because you were too busy building your empire. She wasn't wrong. But Adrian was starting to understand that maybe his empire had been built on foundations he'd abandoned here. That maybe every success he'd achieved had been powered by the dream he'd left behind, the love he'd walked away from. Maybe you've been there too, standing in the ruins of a choice you made years ago, wondering if it's too late to build something different. Wondering if the bridges you burned can ever be rebuilt. The truth is, sometimes the most important discoveries come when we're brave enough to face what we've lost. And Adrian's about to discover something that will change everything. Not just about Claire and the farm, but about himself. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost aggressive in their beauty, like Vermont was showing off just for them. Claire checked her watch. I need to lead a group session in 20 minutes, she said. You're welcome to stay for dinner afterward. We eat family style, everyone together. Or if you'd rather head back to wherever you're staying. I got a room in town, Adrian said. But I'd like to stay. For dinner. If that's okay. It's okay, Claire said. Just be prepared. People will be curious about you. We don't get many visitors who show up in Teslas. She smiled when she said it, and for just a moment, Adrian saw a flash of the old Claire, the one who used to tease him about his love of gadgets and technology even as she appreciated what he could build with them. I can handle curious, he said. But as Claire disappeared into the meditation barn to lead her session, and Adrian found himself alone on the porch of the farmhouse. He wondered if he could really handle any of this. The weight of what Claire had built, what she'd sacrificed, what she'd carried alone for 7 years, it was almost too much to bear. He walked back to his car, not to leave, but to grab his laptop bag from the trunk. An old habit, always having his computer nearby. As he closed the trunk, he noticed a small outbuilding he hadn't explored yet, tucked back near the tree line. It looked newer than the other structures. Its wood not yet weathered gray. Something drew him toward it. Maybe just curiosity. Maybe some unconscious sense that there were still secrets here. Still pieces of the puzzle he hadn't found. The door wasn't locked. Inside, he found what looked like an office, Claire's office. Judging by the jacket hanging on the back of the door and the organized chaos of paperwork covering the desk. He shouldn't look. He knew he shouldn't. This was an invasion of privacy. A violation of the trust Claire was tentatively offering him. But Adrian's eyes had already found the filing cabinet in the corner, slightly ajar. And on top of it, a box labeled simply Adrian in Claire's careful handwriting. His hands were opening the box before his conscience could stop him. Inside, a collection of items that made his throat close. His old college sweatshirt, the one he'd left behind 7 years ago. A stack of blueprints, their plans for the farm, covered in notes in both their handwriting. Photographs, dozens of them of their time together. And beneath it all, newspaper clippings. Articles. About him. About his company. About his success. Claire had been following his journey the entire time, collecting evidence of his achievements like precious things, like treasures worth keeping. Adrian lifted the articles with shaking hands, and that's when he saw it. Underneath the clippings, a manila folder. Inside the folder, documents that made no sense at first. Financial records. Bank statements. Wire transfers. And then a letter. Not addressed to anyone, not signed, but clearly in Claire's handwriting. It was dated 7 years ago, just weeks after Adrian had left for San Francisco. And as Adrian began to read, his entire understanding of the last 7 years shattered and reformed into something he'd never imagined. Something that was about to break his heart in a way that leaving never had. Adrian's hands trembled as he read Claire's letter. The paper was worn, like it had been handled many times, read and reread until the creases threatened to tear. The letter wasn't to him. It was to herself, it seemed. A record of a decision. A confession kept private. I called David today. David Weathersby, Dad's old college roommate, the one who made all that money in venture capital. I told him about Adrian, about the startup, about the opportunity. I didn't tell Adrian I was doing this. I'm not going to tell him. He needs to do this on his own, or he'll always wonder if he really earned it. But I can give him a chance. David owes Dad a favor from way back, something about Dad lending him money when his first company was failing. I called in that favor. Not for me. For Adrian. David's going to review Adrian's pitch. If it's good, and I know it will be because Adrian is brilliant, David will fund it. He'll pretend it's just business, just smart investing. Adrian will never know I was involved. He'll think he did it all himself. And maybe that's how it should be. He needs to be able to succeed without me. To know he can. Even if it means he succeeds far away from here. Even if it means I lose him. Because that's what love is, isn't it? Giving someone wings even when you know they'll fly away from you. I'm keeping this letter to remind myself on the hard days ahead that I did the right thing. That loving someone sometimes means letting them go completely. That his success will be worth my loneliness. God, I hope it's worth it. I hope he builds something amazing. I hope he's happy. I hope someday he forgives me for not being enough reason to stay. Adrian read it 3 times. Then a 4th. Each time, the words rearranged his understanding of the past 7 years, shuffled them like a deck of cards dealt by fate. David Weathersby, the angel investor who'd taken a chance on an unknown kid with a farming app. The man who'd funded Adrian's initial round when every other VC in Silicon Valley had passed. The man whose investment had been the domino that started everything, that brought in other investors, that turned Adrian's little app into a multi-million-dollar company. Adrian had always been grateful to David, had even invited him to several company events over the years. But David had always been distant, professional, never really engaging beyond the necessary business interactions. Adrian had assumed he was just another detached investor, someone who'd seen dollar signs in the pitch deck and nothing more. But David hadn't been investing in the company. He'd been repaying a debt to a dead man by helping his daughter save the man she loved. Claire had given Adrian his success. She'd opened the door. She'd made the call. She'd used her leverage, her father's memory, to give Adrian the chance that had changed his life. And she'd never told him, had never taken credit, had let him believe he'd done it all on his own. Adrian sank into Claire's desk chair, the letter still clutched in his hands. Around him, the office seemed to pulse with evidence of her sacrifice. More articles about his company, printed and carefully saved. A business magazine with Adrian on the cover, the edges worn like it had been looked at repeatedly. Post-it notes with dates and achievements. Adrian closes Series B funding. Adrian named to Forbes 30 under 30. Adrian's company reaches 10 million users. She'd been proud of him. From a distance, with no expectation of recognition, she'd watched him succeed and been proud. He opened the filing cabinet, driven now by a need to understand the full scope of what Claire had done, what she'd sacrificed. The files were meticulously organized, each one labeled by year. Farm finances going back 7 years, every penny accounted for. The picture they painted was devastating. The first year after Adrian left, the farm had lost money. Not catastrophically but steadily. Claire had covered the losses with her inheritance, the money from her grandmother. The second year worse. A drought had killed half the crops. Unexpected repairs on the barn. Medical bills. Claire had apparently been injured, something about a fall, though Adrian found no details about how serious it had been. The third year, a developer had made an offer. Adrian found the letter, pristine and official, offering $1.2 million for the property. Below it, Claire's handwritten note. No, this is our dream. I won't sell our dream. But she should have. Looking at the financial records, she absolutely should have sold. The farm was drowning in debt. The bank had sent foreclosure warnings. Claire had been 1 bad month away from losing everything. And then, year 4, a sudden influx of cash. Enough to cover the debts, enough to start building. Adrian traced the source back through several documents until he found it. Claire had sold something, a trust fund apparently, something her grandmother had set up that had matured. It was supposed to be Claire's retirement, her safety net, her future. She'd poured it all into the farm, into their dream, into the vision they'd built together. Year 5, more expenses. The meditation barn conversion. The cottage renovations. Solar panels installed on the farmhouse. All of it financed by Claire selling off the last of her inheritance, the last pieces of security she'd had. Years 6 and 7, the farm finally started generating income, but barely. The retreat programs brought in money, but not enough. Not nearly enough to cover the maintenance, the utilities, the feed for the animals, the salaries for the residents, the materials for the workshops. Adrian did the math in his head, something he was very good at, something that had made him a successful businessman. By his calculations, Claire was operating at a loss of at least $30,000 a year. She was subsidizing other people's healing with her own financial ruin. She was, quite literally, sacrificing everything to keep their dream alive. And Adrian had been in San Francisco, getting rich, while Claire had been here, getting poor, and neither of them had been honest about any of it. He found more in the box. A stack of letters, all addressed to him, all stamped but never sent. He picked up the top one, dated about 3 years ago. Dear Adrian, I saw you did another funding round. $50 million. I can't even imagine that much money. I'm so proud of you. The barn roof is leaking and I can't afford to fix it, but I'm so proud of you. That probably sounds bitter. I don't mean it to be. I really am proud. You're changing the world, helping farmers everywhere do what we tried to do here. Your software is making a difference. I read that it's being used in 40 countries now. 40 countries. And it all started here with us with our little farm. I like to think that I'm part of that, somehow. That our dream is touching lives all over the world, even if it's through you, even if you don't remember that it started with us. I miss you. God, I miss you every day. I miss your laugh and your terrible cooking and the way you'd explain technology to me like I was the smartest person in the world even when I didn't understand half of what you were saying. I miss who we were together. But I don't regret letting you go. You needed to become who you were meant to be. And you have. You really have. Maybe someday you'll come back. Maybe someday you'll see what I've built here and you'll understand that I never stopped believing in us, in our dream. But if you don't, if you've moved on and built a new life and forgotten about the farm and the girl who loved you, that's okay too. I just want you to be happy, Adrian. Even if your happiness doesn't include me. I'll always love you. Always. Claire. Adrian couldn't see the words anymore. His vision had blurred with tears that he didn't bother wiping away. He pulled out another letter, and another, reading through years of Claire's private thoughts, her hidden feelings, her quiet grief. Every letter told the same story. Pride in his success. Pain at his absence. Love that never wavered, never faded. Never turned bitter despite every reason it should have. At the bottom of the box, he found one more document. A photocopy of a check, made out to David Weathersby Ventures. The memo line read, "Consulting fee for Smith Startup Evaluation." It was dated 7 years ago, for $5,000. Claire hadn't just made a phone call. She'd paid David to review Adrian's pitch. $5,000 she couldn't afford, at a time when the farm was already struggling, to give Adrian a chance. The full picture finally crystallized. Claire hadn't just let Adrian go. She'd financed his escape. She'd used her connections, her money, her leverage to make sure that when he left, he'd succeed. She'd guaranteed his success at the cost of her own security. And then she'd spent 7 years watching him thrive while she struggled. And she'd never once asked him for help. Never reached out. Never told him the truth. Because she'd loved him enough to set him free completely. No strings. No guilt. No debt. It was the most selfless, heartbreaking thing Adrian had ever encountered. And it made his own absence, his own silence, feel like a betrayal of cosmic proportions. Stories like this don't come along every day. Stories about love so pure it asks for nothing in return. If you're feeling this, if this is resonating with you, that's because real love, the kind that changes lives, is rare and precious and worth paying attention to. Stay with us, because what happens next will determine whether 7 years of sacrifice can lead to healing, or if some distances are just too far to cross. Adrian heard voices outside, the group session ending, people making their way toward the farmhouse for dinner. He carefully placed everything back in the box, back in the filing cabinet, trying to restore the order he'd disturbed. But his hands felt clumsy, his movements uncoordinated. His whole world had tilted sideways and he wasn't sure how to stand straight anymore. He needed to talk to Claire. Needed to confront her with what he'd found, what he now knew. Needed to what? Thank her. Apologize. Rage at her for being so selfless it was practically self-destructive? All of the above, probably. But as he stood to leave the office, he noticed one more thing. On Claire's bulletin board, pinned among reminders about vet appointments and workshop schedules, was a small photograph. Adrian and Claire, 9 years ago, standing in front of the farmhouse on the day they'd bought it. They were grinning like idiots, covered in dust from their first attempt at cleaning, young and in love and absolutely certain they could take on the world. Beneath the photo, in Claire's handwriting, were 3 words. We did it. Not I did it. We did it. Even after everything, even after 7 years of doing it alone, Claire still considered the farm their shared accomplishment. Still held space for Adrian in the dream, even though he'd abandoned his post. Adrian unpinned the photograph, held it in his hands. The 2 people in the picture looked like strangers to him now. So young, so naive, so unaware of how hard life was about to get, of how thoroughly they'd fail to hold on to each other. But looking at Claire's face in that photograph, at the pure joy radiating from her, Adrian realized something. He'd spent 7 years chasing a version of success that looked good on paper but felt empty in practice. He'd built a company, made a fortune, earned recognition, and none of it had filled the hollow space inside him. But Claire had taken their dream and grown it into something real. Something that healed people. Something that mattered. She'd succeeded in all the ways that actually counted. And she'd done it while loving him from a distance, while supporting his success secretly, while never asking for anything in return. The question now was simple. What was Adrian going to do about it? He walked out of the office, closing the door quietly behind him. Through the farmhouse windows, he could see people gathering in the kitchen, setting the long table, laughing and talking with the ease of family. Claire was there, tying an apron around her waist, saying something that made an elderly man laugh. She looked happy. Tired, yes, and probably worried about money and sustainability and 100 other things. But fundamentally happy. Content with what she'd built, with the life she'd chosen. Adrian had a choice to make. He could confront Claire, could tell her what he'd found, could try to repay her sacrifice with money or promises or grand gestures, could try to rescue her the way she'd once rescued him. Or he could do something harder. He could stay. Not just for dinner, not just for a visit, but really stay. Could become part of what she'd built instead of trying to buy his way into redemption. Could maybe finally build the life they'd once dreamed of together if she'd let him. If 7 years hadn't created a distance too vast to cross. There was only one way to find out. Adrian took a deep breath, slipped the photograph into his pocket, and walked toward the farmhouse where Claire was waiting, unknowing, one last dinner away from having to face the truth they'd both been avoiding for 7 years. The truth that some loves don't die, they just wait. Buried like seeds under winter snow, patient, persistent, ready to bloom again if given the smallest chance. The question was whether Adrian would be brave enough to plant himself in the soil beside Claire and grow something new from the ruins of what they'd lost. Dinner at Meadowbrook Farm was nothing like the formal affairs Adrian had grown accustomed to in his life as a tech executive. There were no assigned seats, no name cards, no carefully curated wine pairings. Instead, 23 people crowded around a table built for 15, plates passed hand to hand, conversations overlapping in the warm chaos of chosen family. Adrian sat between a ceramics artist named Maya and a retired veteran named Sam who managed the livestock. Across from him, an elderly woman named Margaret told stories about teaching inner-city kids about farming, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. Claire sat at the far end of the table, barely visible through the crowd of people, but her presence filled the room in ways that had nothing to do with proximity. "So you're the Adrian," Sam said halfway through the meal, his tone friendly but appraising. Claire mentioned you might visit someday. She did. Adrian tried to keep his voice neutral. Sure. She talks about you sometimes when we're working. Always in past tense, though. Like you were a story that already ended. Sam took a drink of his water, his eyes sharp despite his casual demeanor. You planning to prove her wrong about that? It was a direct question, the kind Adrian usually deflected with practiced corporate diplomacy. But something about this place, these people, demanded honesty. I'm trying to, Adrian admitted. I'm not sure if I can. Sam nodded, as if this answer satisfied him. Well, trying's better than not showing up at all. Which is what you've been doing for 7 years, if my math's right. Sam, Maya interjected gently. Maybe don't interrogate the guest? I'm not interrogating. I'm assessing. There's a difference. But Sam softened, leaning back in his chair. Look, man, I don't know your full story. But I know Claire's. I know she's put everything into this place. I know she works herself to exhaustion and doesn't ask for help even when she needs it. I know she's the kindest, strongest person I've ever met, and if you're here to disrupt what she's built, to make her doubt herself or her choices, then you should leave. But if you're here because you finally figured out what the rest of us already know, that she's extraordinary and this place is extraordinary and walking away from either was the biggest mistake of your life, then maybe you should stay. The table had gone quiet during Sam's speech, though people tried to pretend they weren't listening. Adrian felt the weight of their attention. These strangers who'd become Claire's family while he'd been absent. They were protective of her. They loved her. They'd earned the right to judge him. You're right, Adrian said clearly, loud enough for the whole table to hear. About all of it. Leaving was the biggest mistake of my life. And I'm here because I finally figured out what I should have known 7 years ago. That nothing I could build anywhere else would matter as much as what was right here. What's still right here? A few seats down, Claire's head lifted. Their eyes met across the crowded table, across 7 years of silence and secrets. And Adrian saw surprise there. And something else. Something that looked dangerously like hope. The conversation resumed gradually, people returning to their meals and their stories. But Adrian felt the shift. He'd been evaluated and tentatively accepted, at least enough to be allowed to stay for dessert. After dinner, as people dispersed to various activities, evening chores, personal time, Adrian found himself alone on the porch with Claire. The sun had fully set now, replaced by a sky so dense with stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. Living in San Francisco with its light pollution and fog, Adrian had forgotten what the night sky actually looked like. Your friends are protective of you, Adrian said, breaking the comfortable silence. They're good people, Claire replied. They've become my family, I suppose. When you don't have much blood family left and when people leave, you build family where you can find it. Adrian heard what she didn't say. When your partner abandons you. When you're left alone to build dreams for two. Claire, I need to tell you something. The words came out rushed, unplanned. I need to apologize and I need to thank you and I need to confess something. She turned to face him, her expression guarded but open. Okay. I went into your office. While you were leading the group session. I know I shouldn't have. It was a violation of your privacy and your trust, and I'm sorry for that. But I found the box. The one with my name on it. Claire's face paled, visible even in the dim porch light. Adrian, I can explain. No, let me finish. Please. He took a breath. I found the articles. The letters you never sent. The financial records. The letter about David Weathersby. Claire, I know what you did. I know you're the reason my company got funded. I know you used your father's connection to give me a chance. I know you've been following my career, proud of me, while you've been here struggling. And I know, God, Claire, I know you've been keeping this farm alive on nothing but willpower and sacrifice. I know you could have sold it a dozen times. I know you've put every penny you have into maintaining our dream. Tears were streaming down Claire's face now, silent and steady. She didn't try to hide them, didn't try to deny anything. Why? Adrian asked, his own voice breaking. Why would you do all that? Why wouldn't you tell me? Why wouldn't you ask for help? Because it was what you needed, Claire said simply. You needed to succeed on your own. You needed to prove to yourself that you could build something meaningful, that your dreams had value. If you'd known I was involved, if you'd known you only got funding because of a favor, it would have poisoned every achievement. You would have always wondered if you'd really earned it. But I didn't earn it. Not really. Not without you. Yes, you did, Claire insisted. I made one phone call, Adrian. The rest was all you. Your vision, your work, your brilliance. David wouldn't have invested if your idea wasn't solid. Favor or no favor. I opened a door. You walked through it and built a castle. That was all you. And the farm. You've been building this alone, going broke to keep it alive. Why? Why not tell me you were struggling? I could have helped. I have money now more than I know what to do with. I would have sent you everything you needed. Claire shook her head. That's exactly why I didn't tell you. This needed to be my thing, Adrian. My dream, my achievement. Not something funded by your guilt or your pity. You got to build your empire. I got to build mine. Even if mine is smaller, even if it makes no financial sense, it's mine. I did this. And that matters. Adrian understood suddenly what he'd been missing. This wasn't about the money or the struggle or the sacrifice. This was about autonomy. About Claire proving to herself and maybe to him that she was capable of building something meaningful on her own. That she wasn't just the girlfriend left behind, waiting for her successful ex to come rescue her. Your empire isn't smaller, Adrian said quietly. It's bigger. It matters more. In 7 years, I built software that helps people farm more efficiently. That's useful, it's important, but Claire, you built a place that helps people heal. That saves lives. That gives people hope when they've lost it. You've touched dozens, probably hundreds of lives directly. I've touched millions of users who see my software as a tool, nothing more. What you've built is bigger, more important, and more real than anything I've accomplished. Don't diminish what you've done, Claire said. Your work matters too. Maybe. But it doesn't matter to me. Not anymore. Not the way this place does. Not the way you do. Adrian moved closer, close enough to see the tears caught on her eyelashes, close enough to smell the lavender soap she'd always loved. I didn't come here to rescue you, Claire. I came here because I'm the one who needs saving. I'm successful and wealthy and completely empty inside. I've spent 7 years building something impressive that makes me feel nothing. And in the same 7 years, you've built something small that makes you feel everything. You chose right. I chose wrong. And I'm hoping, begging really, that it's not too late to make a different choice. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to stay. Not just for tonight, not just for a visit. I want to move back. I want to help you build this place into everything it deserves to be. I want to invest in your dream, our dream. I want to work beside you. I want to wake up here and go to sleep here and spend whatever time I have left making up for the time I wasted away from here, from you. Claire was shaking her head before he finished. Adrian, you can't just append your entire life because you're having a midlife crisis at 32. This isn't a crisis. This is clarity. For the first time in 7 years, I can see clearly what matters. And it's not in San Francisco. It's not in board meetings or investor presentations or Forbes profiles. It's here. With you. If you'll have me. I don't need your money, Claire said, but her voice was wavering. I know you don't. You've made that abundantly clear. But maybe the farm does. Maybe the dream does. Not to survive, you've proven you can do that on your own. But to thrive. To grow. To reach more people, help more lives, become everything we imagined it could be. Let me be part of that. Not as the rich ex-boyfriend swooping in to save the day, but as your partner. Like we were supposed to be from the beginning. Adrian, Claire stopped, her breath catching. I never stopped loving you. I tried to. God knows I tried. It would have been easier. But every time I hammered a nail or planted a seed or welcomed a new guest, I was thinking about you. About us. About the life we were supposed to build together. And hating that I couldn't stop wanting it. Wanting you, even after you'd moved on. I never moved on, Adrian said. I just got lost for a while. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again. Not unless you tell me to go. Claire looked at him for a long moment, her brown eyes searching his face for something. Maybe sincerity, maybe staying power, maybe the boy she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Whatever she found, there must have been enough, because she stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and wrapped her arms around him in a hug that felt like coming home. Adrian held her, this woman who'd loved him selflessly, who'd sacrificed silently, who'd built beauty from their broken dreams, and felt something inside him slot back into place. A piece he hadn't known was missing, clicking home with an almost audible sensation of rightness. We can't just pick up where we left off, Claire murmured into his chest. Too much has happened. We're different people now. I know, Adrian agreed. We start new. Build something different. Together this time. Together, Claire repeated, testing the word like something fragile and precious. They stood there on the porch, wrapped in each other and the Vermont night, while around them the farm hummed with quiet life. Someone was playing guitar in the meditation barn. Laughter drifted from the cottage where the residents lived. A goat bleated from the pasture, probably Adrian the goat, stubbornly refusing to settle down for the night. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about this was perfect. There would be hard conversations ahead, logistics to work out, hurt to heal, trust to rebuild. Adrian would have to figure out how to disentangle himself from his company, or at least step back significantly. Claire would have to learn to accept help without feeling like she was failing. They'd both have to navigate the space between who they'd been together and who they'd become apart. But looking around at the farm Claire had built, at the community she'd nurtured, at the dream she'd kept alive when he'd let it go, Adrian felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. He felt hope. 3 months later, Adrian stood in the same spot on the porch, but everything had changed. The farm now had a name above the entrance. Smith Bennett Sanctuary. Adrian had quietly sold most of his shares in his company, retaining enough involvement to guide its direction but stepping away from daily operations. The money had gone into a trust for the farm, enough to fund operations for decades and expand the healing program significantly. But more importantly, Adrian had become part of the rhythm of the place. He rose at dawn to help with animal care. He taught technology workshops, helping guests learn skills they could use in their own lives. He repaired buildings and planted gardens and slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt his relationship with Claire. They weren't the same couple they'd been 9 years ago. They were better. Scarred, yes, but stronger for it. More honest. More appreciative of what they'd almost lost. And on a crisp November afternoon, standing in front of the people who'd become their family, Adrian and Claire planted a tree together. An apple tree, chosen because it would take years to bear fruit, because it required patience and faith and care, because it was a promise to the future. As they patted the soil around the sapling's roots, Claire looked at Adrian and smiled. It was a smile that held everything, the pain of the past, the joy of the present, the possibility of the future. "We did it," she said, echoing the words from that photograph all those years ago. "We did it," Adrian agreed. "And we're not done yet. Because the best love stories aren't about perfect people making perfect choices. They're about flawed people who lose their way, who make mistakes, who spend years apart before finding their way back. They're about second chances and hard-earned wisdom and love that survives even when it shouldn't, even when all logic says it's impossible. If you've stayed with us through this entire journey, thank you. Stories like this, stories about finding your way back to what matters, they need to be told. They need to be shared. And maybe, just maybe, they'll inspire someone else to look at the life they're living and ask if they're building the right thing. Have you ever had to choose between ambition and love? Have you ever wondered if you took the wrong path? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us your story. Because every person has a Meadowbrook farm somewhere in their past or their future, a place where they're meant to be, if only they're brave enough to find their way there. And if you found meaning in this story, if it touched something inside you, subscribe to our channel. Not because we're asking, but because stories matter. Because sometimes, on a random Tuesday, you need to be reminded that it's never too late to come home. That some loves wait. That the best things in life are worth fighting for, even if the fight takes 7 years. Adrian and Claire's story didn't end with a perfect resolution. It ended with a choice to keep choosing each other, every day, one planted seed at a time. And in the end, that's what love really is. Not a destination, but a garden that needs tending. Not a problem to be solved, but a life to be lived. Together,